Sweet. Well, welcome back. We are in April. We're doing our weekly Astro update. So, hi, I'm Shawna from Smart Astro, and I've been invited by Sonia from Celestia Astrology to do our Astro Weekly update. We are going to look at the 9th through the 16th of April. Thank you so much for having me, Sonia.
Thank you for joining me. It's always fun when we get to talk together.
Yeah, we've had a good little chat and hopefully got our bloopers out of the way here.
Yeah.
We've already been through our first week of April here, going from the 3rd up through the 7th, and now we're looking at the 9th through the 16th. So on the 13th, we have our full moon in Libra, 23 degrees. Later that day, we're going to have Venus going direct in Pisces. Hi, sir. My little Taurus rising here. And then we're looking at the Mercury entering Aries on the 16th. Make sure you're looking at those times because they are universal times. So set it for your own time zone, please.
Yeah.
Okay. If we take a quick look back at last week, we talked about Venus conjoining the North Node in Pisces. We had Mars trining Saturn, and we talked about the very bittersweet aspects there. I know that's been very real for some of us. We talked about that Mars trine Venus, Venus still being retrograde in Pisces, and then Venus conjoining Saturn also in Pisces. Everything is so Venusian and everything's happening in that border of Pisces and Aries right now. We have coming up, we have the Sun conjoining Chiron in Aries, a full moon in Libra, which is going to bring in our Venusian aspects as well, since Venus is the ruler of Libra. We will have Venus turning direct, finally. Still not out of shadow period, but Venus turning direct. Saturn joining up with the nodes and feeling some of the weight there and new directions maybe. And Mercury entering Pisces finally and catching a little bit of that warm air coming from Aries.
Yeah, Mercury going back to Aries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I mean, this full moon in Libra is like the first one since the nodes left Libra. So we've had this like 2-year long story while the nodes have moved there. So this is kind of, not only is it the first full moon since the eclipses that we had in March, but also since the 2023 to 2025 eclipses in the Libra Aries axis. So it's kind of a culmination of those themes that we've been working on for 2 years as well in that area of our chart. So the revelations and the culminations that come with this full moon could be quite important for us and maybe show us what still needs to be done.
Maybe feeling like a little bit of closure even on some of those situations over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, literally like an hour later, or less than an hour, 40 minutes later, Venus turns direct. So it's kind of like the timing of the full moon is while she's still retrograde, and then within the same hour, she's going to move and station. So she is so slow at that time, practically stationary in the sky. So that shows that things just aren't shifting. Quite often when a planet is about to station, it's like a real, everything comes to a standstill. If you imagine like a boat sailing, it's like just stop. The sea is calm and still, and everything's just come to a halt. So all those issues that we've been working on during the retrograde, those themes of women in our life and creativity and what and who and how we love that might have been shifted or revealed to us during the retrograde. This is a real time to lean into what we've been shown and what the full moon is showing us and what we've worked on over the last 2 years that's been coming to. So it's all coming to a head around this time. But there's like this pause, like almost even if like you're going up a roller coaster or something, and it's that climb to the top that's so slow and the tension's building and building, and then that pause at the top, that's the worst bit for me. I hate it when you know it's going to go over the top. That stillness at the top when you've got those views out, but you know what's coming. And then once you're on that downward roll, there's nothing you can do. You just got to surrender and go with the flow. But that pause at the top is like the scariest thing for me.
Yeah, it almost feels like time stands still when you're in that moment.
It really does, doesn't it?
It's almost like, maybe this is a little too heavy, but the eye of the tornado.
Yes.
Yeah, like everything is moving around you, but somehow you're still very still.
but also what you can see in that moment, sort of everything that's swirling around, but what you can see in that stillness. And it's kind of like meditation as well, what that can reveal, that people sometimes say they don't have time for meditation. And it's like, oh, but that's when you really need it.
That's when you need it.
Yeah, when you most need it. You know, somebody who's got plenty of time probably has time to process everything, but somebody who's so busy most needs that, even if it's 10 minutes, just for stillness, to just let their mind settle. And really, stillness, you can get those revelations that really help you focus and move forward so much clearer and so much more directly. And then, of course, Mercury's been direct, retracing those retrograde steps, but this threshold from Pisces to Aries that's been so activated, it's so sensitive now. It's had so many planets going backwards and forwards over it. And it's retracing those steps, the same as Venus is, reigniting that spark and passion. And Shawna's just written on Substack a really beautiful piece on Aries and the spark and what happens when it doesn't ignite. And I highly recommend you find Tales from the 12th on Substack and just see how beautifully she's reframed that, because we don't find the spark in this first decan of Aries. And what does that look like for those of us who don't necessarily have that? You know, a lot of astrologers are writing about that creative spark or that initiation, and what are we igniting? And if you haven't had that experience in the last couple of weeks, what then? And that's exactly what Shawna's been speaking to. Thank you for that, Shawna. I needed to read that today.
Thank you. Thanks.
No, it was really thoughtful and special, because that's what we talk about, reigniting the spark and the passion. But what can it look like if that's not what you're experiencing? What's going on when it isn't? So let's have a deeper look at that full moon.
Yeah, so the Libra full moon, I really love that you bring in the Wild Way cards from Nicola Allen. They're just so beautiful and so thoughtful. And it was because of you that I went ahead and I got my own deck, because it's just such a lovely take on the decans and how to bring those things in. And she does such a beautiful job, and the artwork is amazing. But this Libra full moon, you know, I really feel like it's going to be, well, Libra is going to highlight, you know, those themes around balance for sure. You know, Libra seeks equilibrium, and you know, a full moon is bringing about the culmination of whatever the situation is. So I think bringing those two together, especially after this eclipse season, rounding out this whole series of eclipses over the last couple of years, where can we find balance over imbalance? How can we find where things are off kilter? You know, is this moon going to expose where we're giving too much or taking too much, or compromising our sense of self, or where are we not finding enough compromise? You know, Libra is the scales, and I feel like this full moon is going to allow us to highlight, for lack of a better word, highlight where we are in the middle of that situation. You know, we were just talking about that calm before, you know, after the pressure builds and before the surrender. And I think that's a really beautiful demonstration, actually, of where this full moon is going to fall.
Yeah, because we're not actually in Libra season, but Libra comes at the turning of the seasons, doesn't it? That indicates that move into the autumn. Well, it's autumn for us, but fall for you. And that's what it's showing us, this card of taking shelter. The decan rulers here, this decan of Libra 3, the third decan, is, the decans can be seen as like cardinal, fixed and mutable as they move through the signs. So it's like a mutable decan, but it's ruled by Jupiter and Mercury. So it's of the nature of those two planets. And in tarot, it's seen as the Four of Swords. That's the corresponding card, which obviously is a card of like deep rest. It's a time when you've done all the summer jobs, the harvest is in, you've collected everything, you've dried everything, everything's hung up to store, or you've done all your pickling and your canning and everything sort of in the olden days, or if you're still blackberrying or anything, those jobs are all over now. So it's time now to hibernate in that sense. Kira Reiber calls it extremes, which I suppose is that turning point. So it's like that extremes. What is that season going to look like for you? And Austin Coppock calls it the gyroscope, going back to what Shawna was talking about with the balance and the scales, and reflecting the fact that it's ever moving. This isn't something where you get one balance and one result. It's something where it's constantly adjusting with the flow. You see here in the picture, this little dove is adjusting to the weather, the weather is constantly shifting and changing. It's not once and done. So it's kind of reflecting that movement. And we've got the keywords there: rebalancing body and mind, restoration and equilibrium. So it's finding that constantly shifting balance as well. So that's kind of the movement that's going on, and reflecting that it's a mutable decan as well. So the little story that we've got with the Huawei for this little dove is that as the rain pours down and the tree sways violently in the wind, Libra free dove has found shelter and peace. And in these chaotic times, it's now more important than ever to seek shelter from the storms that continue to rage in the world around us. Going back to what Shawna was saying about the tornado and the eye of it, it's like the dove has found that place. And we can be easily thrown off balance. So now is the time to recalibrate and return to your center, to restore your body and mind. You may need to take time away from technology, revisit your meditation practice, or simply get some rest. So it's those same themes that we've already spoken about. It's just what's coming up right now. It's interesting as well that I see here the moon is conjunct the fixed star Spica or Speaker. Never know quite how it's said. And Ptolemy classified this fixed star to be of the nature of Venus and Mars combined. And the moon is kind of like the most important planet to be conjunct a fixed star, because the moon is said to translate and gather those energies up and bring them down to Earth for us. So when another planet is conjunct the star, it can be harder for us to access what the star is telling us or showing us or bringing for us. But when the moon is conjunct, it's easier for us to benefit from that on Earth, because that's kind of what the moon does, is it's closest to Earth and it wants to gather those energies and bring them down to us on Earth. So this star bestows success, renown, riches, and a sweet disposition. I mean, obviously it's in Venus's sign, a love of art and science, and when well aspected. Success and renown is when it's well aspected, and this unscrupulousness and injustice is when it's maltreated. So I would say with this full moon with the moon, I would say it's well treated. Although the moon isn't particularly dignified or otherwise, it hasn't got sighted rule of Venus or Saturn, but there's no malefics aspecting it. There is Mars, but it's past. The moon is applying to that square.
I feel like the moon is definitely about to aspect Mars there, but I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you take it back to the image of the dove, right? There's chaos surrounding this little bird, but there's also with the look of peace on its face, its hands in that prayer pose, and just the scarf really just indicates a sense of preparedness or expectation.
Yes.
So you've done the hard work, like you mentioned before, in this particular time of the year, but because you know the cycles, because you know the seasons coming, you can take that measured sense. You can make sure that you're prepared for the intensity that's coming, or like we talked about before with the idea of the roller coaster, you can be prepared for that surrender at that point, because there isn't anything you can do to change things. You just have to go with the flow. So I think, you're absolutely right. Maybe taking a step away from technology, or, finding your meditative routines again, or starting a new one. Starting a new one would be okay. But you mentioned some aspect here to Mars, with the sun in Aries, maybe you're finding a way to get more physically active, especially, in the Northern Hemisphere, we've got warmer weather coming. And a lot of times for us, that brings some precarious weather where I live in the Midwest. But on those days when the sun is out and you're just starting to get that warmth and that sunshine, and, flowers are coming in the next few weeks, and, you want to be outside more. You want to spend more time outside. And so this could, that Moon Mars square could certainly just be as simple as you're going to start adding walks into your routine,
Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it. As we said, that both rulers are averse, which can indicate some difficulty, like some lack of getting those resources from the rulers. It's kind of leaving them a bit unsupervised. But Mars can see the sun, so that's good. They're in a square aspect. And the sun here is exalted, so it's in its exaltation, but it's also conjunct Chiron, which is bringing in I would say, the opportunity for healing, but also the fact that this could be touching our wounds, like reminding us of our wounds that we've got in Aries. And in Aries, that can often be around issues like independence, speaking up for yourself. You know, where have you spoken up for yourself before and been closed down? Quite often, like in our childhood or something, we've been told to shush, or that our voice isn't valued, and then we've learned a pattern. So this is like kind of highlighting a pattern that we've maybe learned, and asking us to review that. Is that still an appropriate pattern now? Or is it time to review it and break free from it? You know, is there something that the moon and Spica are bringing through for you that's going to help you grow out of that pattern now? You know, as we live and grow, we can leave these childhood conditionings behind us. And that's what Aries is trying to teach us. And we can embody that pioneering spirit again, and just bring that through for ourselves, that we don't have to stick to what we were taught before. We can be independent of ourselves, and that's independence of your mind as well as your spirit, and thinking outside the box again. But yeah, we do, it's really interesting, because it's kind of like a T-square, isn't it, here, between the moon, sun, and then Mars in the moon's sign. So the moon is providing those resources for Mars, but Mars is causing difficulties for both the sun, which is exalted in Mars's sign, and then Mars is in the moon's sign. So yeah, there's that interconnectedness of who's providing resources for who. But yeah, definitely Mars is asking questions of both the luminaries from that point, and asking them to take action. And obviously the action that the Sun and Chiron want to take is some healing of old wounds, and like a healing where you're in a position to then help others. Maybe you see somebody struggling with something that you've struggled with before, and by helping them, you have a realization yourself of, oh, okay, I'm giving them advice that I wish my younger self had heard, advice that I need to hear as well. When you give that advice, that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that Chiron helps us with. And of course, we can't forget that our friend Neptune is now co-present with all of this going on. So Neptune may be clouding this for us, making it a little bit more difficult to see, or maybe adding a spiritual element to it, or a dreaminess to it, making it more spiritual for us. Like if you're meditating to help with this, taking it to another level for you, which would be wonderful. I'd love that for me. I'd like to book that in, please, rather than confusion. But it can also bring that fog and confusion, and I've had quite a few of those moments myself in the last week or so. I can certainly feel that Neptune in Aries already. 2nd of October 2024 was the last new moon solar eclipse at 10 Libra. So that was the last Libra eclipse. So it was only like a few months ago, really. So yeah, 6 months ago. And that was a new moon. So this is like the full moon that completes that cycle that started 6 months ago at 10 Libra. So it's kind of moved on from that 10-degree point, but that 10 degrees of Libra is the point that Mercury went retrograde at, and then Venus went retrograde at 9 degrees. So it's still that sensitive point that was started. It's still tying in with the astrology of now. So that's the point at which Mercury will get out of shadow. So we see here Mercury's poised to return to Aries, but he'll still be in shadow until he reaches that 10-degree point, still remembering things from that Libra eclipse that we had in October. Was there anything else, Shawna, that you could think of?
I really just wanted to add that it could end up being not just breakups, because there's these very difficult aspects. You know, we've got these Chiron points here too, but maybe breakthroughs, you know, a way to set your boundaries just a little better, or be a little more assertive of self. You know, that's a really wonderful theme with the sun in Aries, is finding, you know, your own voice a little bit better, and then kind of figuring out who, you know, and what align with your own values. I think that could be something that hits people on the individual level.
Yeah, it's really important to know. So yeah, this is the first of 2 Venusian moons this month, which is lovely. Even when the astrology is tough around them, it's still that overall Venusian theme is nice. And then we have Venus turning direct, just like literally minutes afterwards. So close. So she's turning direct on the 13th of April at 3:02 in London. And that's British summertime, that time. So it would be 2:02 in universal time. And we see her there at 24 degrees, Saturn at 25 degrees. And as we said before, they're reversed. They've got no line of sight. Both of them together are all Libra. Venus is the domicile ruler and Saturn is the exaltation ruler of Libra. And they're at the same degree, 24. The sun is at 23 and the moon there has just moved slightly within that less than an hour to 24 degrees. But the moon now is exactly conjunct Spica, which is nice. And this relationship, although it's averse in Hellenistic astrology, it does create a quincunx in modern astrology aspects, which is like an unresolvable tension. It's a very difficult tension to resolve. So it is worth noticing. But in like magical circles, it was thought of as quite a very magical aspect to have. Quite often in a lot of paintings, in a lot of churches and everything, the quincunx comes up in a lot of geometric designs and things. You see it reproduced. So that kind of relationship does have something to say. So it's quite nice, even though just that out of sightness, but there is something about that peripheral vision. That's something that you can know without seeing. So it's like leaning into your other senses. That's kind of the sense I get, that the moon and the sun are, yes, they're unsupervised, but maybe there's something coming through from Venus and Saturn. But they're going to have to, if they're going to hear it or they're going to benefit from it, they're going to have to pick it up with other senses, which may be possible with Neptune there, co-present with the sun and opposite the moon. That's not impossibility. And Mercury on the way across the border. Mercury is able to transfer across those boundaries that other planets can't. So it's not impossible, but it's not as easy as when there's a clear line of sight. That's what we're used to using. So
definitely, Neptune almost looks like an antenna here, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, and Mercury just the conductor.
Yeah, they've both got that way of just like up to the sky, taking in that information, rather than Venus.
Yeah.
It's like sending her energy down, like into the earth. The moon is sending it out to the other planets, like drawing it in.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the quincunx. I don't do really anything in modern. I see its value and appreciate it so much, but I can't speak to it because I don't know enough about the theories and concepts with it. But what's called a quincunx in modern is an aversion, and that's still definitely a relationship, right?
Yeah.
If you have a natural, it's like putting magnets of the same type together, they push each other away. And that's kind of how I think of aversions in a sense. But I love your observation of what's in the periphery. That's really nice. There's still a relationship, there's still a connection. It's just not as active or direct as as a typical aspect would be. Yeah.
Another way, I mean, I'm not as good with lichen girding. I don't know if you can have mixed lichen girding, whereas Venus ruling Libra and the exaltation ruler of Pisces. But I don't know if that's pushing lichen girding too far to say that there's some sympathy there between the signs. But we do see it in the bound rulership. There's bound sympathy as well. The bound ruler of Mars, the Decan ruler. So again, mixed dignities. The Decan ruler of the Sun and the bound ruler. I may have that wrong for Venus's placement, but it looks like the bound ruler of Venus is Venus. So there are like more hidden undercurrents of sympathies between them. So that helps. And then you've got the triplicity ruler there of Pisces is the moon. So again, there's these conversations, I suppose, going on and this support that's happening behind the scenes. So it's unsupervised by domicile dignity, but it's not completely left alone. There's uncles and cousins all offering support. And I suppose with the Venus retrograde, we've been looking at like themes about women in our life, creativity. I think I said this at the start, who and what and how we love. And maybe that's shifted. Maybe things or events have come up for you. And if you've noticed any themes coming up in the Aries, if you know the houses and where they land in your own chart and what parts of your life they represent, that may also help in terms of where Venus has been retrograding and what themes and topics she's been bringing up when she's been retrograding from Aries back to Pisces. Then that may help as well identify what kind of themes she's been bringing up for you. And also that she's stationing and turning literally within minutes of this first full moon in Libra. after the eclipses, that feels very significant, that this timing, although it's two separate different timing methods, that looking at the retrogrades and looking at the eclipses, but when they coincide in this way, that feels significant. Like we have these cosmic red neon lights sometimes that flash saying, look at me, I'm important. And this feels like one of those. It feels like the effects are amplified because there's a couple of things coinciding. Also, where Venus is exalted, she's not quite at her exaltation degree, but the North Node is, and the North Node is amplifying what it's touching. So the North Node is amplifying what's going on. The North Node here sandwiched by Saturn and Mercury. Venus signifying like this renewal of a cycle for love, friendships, harmony, mending things, like bringing people together in a positive way, bringing beauty and sexuality and desire, pleasure. She's followed that Inanna's journey into the underworld, this 40 days and 40 nights journey of discovery of this new world that's underworld. And now she emerges back into the living world, sort of blinking in the light of day. And I've got this graphic that we've looked at before of where she is. And we can say now, I'm totally lost here, the station direct. So we've reached this long plateau that we've travelled through Aries and then through Pisces in the blue. And now she's stations direct at 24 degrees. But as you see, we're not totally there yet. We've got to get this slide down, going down the roller coaster. This is the stationary moment now. We've got to get down here through the end of April. She goes back into Aries. May 16th, she reaches that shadow point at 10 degrees of Aries where she went retrograde. So I must have misspoke before. It must have been Venus that went retrograde at 10. So it must have been Mercury that went retrograde at 9. So sorry, I got those muddled. And then it's not until June the 5th that she goes into Taurus, into her home sign, and the whole thing is then over. But obviously you can see from the flat line there, this last bit is so much easier, so much smoother, particularly if you've had things coming up for you. The hard yards of the climb up, this plateau part, and now this easier slide downwards when we kind of know what issues we're dealing with now. It's just the fallout now, really, that we're going back over, retracing our steps, maybe correcting things that we've been shown we need to look at. Is there anything that's coming up for you, Shawna, looking at this?
Well, I really like this graphic, though. As far as, getting the degrees a little off with the stories, they're all intertwined and they're really only at 9 and 10 degrees. So there's not a huge gap there. That's not really a good blooper. No, I wonder with this downward slope now, we're going to have that feeling of ease. With it being Venus, I would hope, some healing. We've already talked about that word surrender so many times in this conversation, but I wonder what kind of possibilities there are for, idealistic or overly romantic or very dreamy kind of situations to appear to while you're still in that shadow period. And to maybe make sure you're letting go of unrealistic fantasies, or maybe, just as a book lover, keep that to your books. I think it's a good chance for a more heartfelt or, truly soulful connections once we get that Venus direct, and the word that you said, just pointing out this graphic, you said the word flatline while Venus is in Aries. And I'm like, oh, it just felt very heavy.
I'm sorry.
No, not in a bad way, just in a very real way. Venus is in exile in Aries, but Venus and Mars are partners, and Venus is the only planet that works with Mars, right? They're the only pair. It's the only partner for Mars. So it's just, that word of surrender coming back, who's taking the reins and who's taking, who's going to be that passenger princess for a while, I think it'll be a great time for reassessing your own personal boundaries, figuring out your own self-worth. Aries is always great for that.
Yeah, certainly, especially with Chiron there, pointing out all the wounds that she's carrying. Well, after that, Mercury wants in on the action. So on the 16th of April, Mercury reaches Aries. So Mercury's been retracing its steps. There we find Mercury conjunct Neptune. So Mercury's travelled back since it went direct through Pisces And we were just saying before we started recording, it seems strange to be talking about this because we're still in the thick of the retrograde while we're recording. So we've still had all the retrograde problems popping up, but it's nice to be talking about a time when Mercury will be re-entering Aries, just crossing over that threshold and getting very close to ending that shadow degree, which we now know is 9 degrees, not 10 degrees. So it's even closer when Mercury's going to be out of that shadow, which will be lovely. But first, he is going to meet Neptune. So, like, same as Venus, he's been on this similar journey. And I can't remember a time, certainly not since I've been in astrology, that they've both been retrograde, literally in the same part of the zodiac at the same time, the same part of the sky. So it's hard to separate out exactly what's one or the other in terms of everything that's going on. Obviously, it's very clear when it's things to do with your computer or whatever, but a lot of the time it's like, well, is this Neptune in Aries? Is Venus? Is this Mercury? What's exactly going on here? Or is it quite often so many of these threads just intertwine? Is it all three of them, like creating something, a synergy of all three together? That's more likely, because astrology is never one single thing. It's always a component of all these planets in the sky interacting with each other. So the fact that all of this is going on and there's this sensitive last few degrees of Pisces and early degrees of Aries, like particularly affecting those cardinal signs and fire signs and those mutable signs and the water signs, like so many people affected by it. Virtually everybody you meet has got something going on, something like quite unusual going on and a story to tell at the moment. There's very few people who are not really feeling it. But yeah, let's look at what did we learn. You know, it's a good time as Mercury just retraces those last few steps to really tune in to what now this pioneer archetype, and Gary Caton described it to Krista as seeking those hard edges. So that's something that Aries is tasked to do, to find those hard edges of what are those boundaries, and Aries going right up to that hard edge, not necessarily stepping over it, but really finding where exactly that edge is, where other signs of the zodiac will stay within those lines. But remembering that Neptune creates that fog and can dissolve things and confuse things. So as they meet, you know, what are they cooking up here for us? What are they deciding on? I quite often look at it as an astrologer's aspect, because it's so symbolic what they create, because part of our job is the book learning and the courses that we do and the studying. But then you look at a chart and you've got to let some of that go from your mind and just read the actual chart in front of you, because there's no book that is going to tell you exactly how to interpret any one chart. It's an individual thing telling its own special story, and you've got to let go of keywords and everything, because what you're seeing is completely unique. The sky at any one moment is never repeated. It's always a completely unique moment. And you can't think, oh, yes, my sister's chart says this, or my so-and-so's chart says that, so this chart is saying the same. No, you've always got to come to a chart completely fresh. And that kind of, I think, is Neptune helping us to step into that place where we can just look at those symbols and read what are they telling us. And yeah, I've written down here a fire blanket. You know, maybe we need that fire blanket of fog coming in with this Aries spark. Could it be too much? With more and more planets joining us now, we've got that hot sun that's exalted, Chiron who's tending to wounds like an ambulance man or a paramedic, sort of chasing around tending to everybody. And as more and more of these planets come in, things are getting busier in Aries. There's more people, that turns the heat up. So, you know, using that analogy of a soup, and you're throwing more and more ingredients in and things are getting more and more confused. Do you like a simple tomato soup or a minestrone when there's loads of ingredients and everything's thrown in? So we see some aspects, and most notable is this sextile to Pluto. So all of these planets coming into Aries are going to straight away, apart from passing over this threshold of Neptune, they're also going to be making this sextile to Pluto at 3 degrees. And what's got me excited, of course, is that Neptune will eventually also make this sextile to Pluto. And Mercury will now be in a better sextile relationship also with Jupiter and Gemini. As it moves direct and meets Jupiter and Gemini at 18 degrees. So I think we said before about this, that's going to start activating Jupiter and Gemini a lot. That might have been a bit slower while Mercury's been retrograde and going back to Pisces and been a bit dreamy and a little bit lost. That's maybe slowed down all this data, but we can maybe expect that to start speeding up now. And also with the sextile to Pluto, maybe thoughts and communications coming through from the past. Pluto can be quite cathartic in that way, purging things, overturning secrets from the past. So maybe as Mercury's going direct, he's reminding, of course, he's been here before the retrograde, but now he's revised it, rethought it, reflected on it, and he's going to show you, okay, you still haven't dealt with this. This is still coming up for you. It really is time now to do something about this. Maybe that's what's happening. Mercury is the messenger planet after all. So he's ruling our thoughts, our communications, technology, how we learn things. You know, I found that quite often when we were in study group, we could all go to the same lecture, but different people would pick up different things from it, and we'd come away and go into study group, and one of us would say, oh, it was this, and somebody else would have heard something different. So we'd have to have a consensus and go back to the slides and see exactly what was said. And that's quite often about where our Mercuries are and how we learn and how we pick up that information. And also money and exchange. And there's a lot of talk as we record about trade wars and that exchange and how that's moving around the globe. So I wonder how much Neptune and Mercury have to do with how that's changing and shifting around the globe, and how once Mercury goes direct and moves away from this meeting with Neptune, how that might change and evolve. And Adam did say something about being that initiatory sign, but that quite often what started in Aries doesn't stay. It's kind of started there, but it has to go through the fixed sign and then the mutable. So it can shift and evolve and change. So it might start out this way, but it may not finish in the same way. It might shift and change. So maybe things won't stay exactly as they are or how they seem now with that particular story. We'll have to see how that pans out, I suppose.
Yeah, I think with this particular movement, it's bold ideas, right? We're seeing a lot of bold ideas. We're seeing a lot of not always agreeable, but we can agree that they're bold. Some impulsive decisions, bringing in Neptune, maybe some impulsive intuition on a personal level. We need to beware of our own as well as others, maybe persuasive speech, deceptive speech. And I think that can fall into monetary transactions, business transactions. So apart from maybe some overly persuasive or deceptive speech, we have maybe some inspiration in speech as well. Or maybe you'll, on a personal level, find a new poet that you love that you've never heard of before. Or maybe you'll be inclined to start writing or dabbling, even just for yourself. I just feel like Neptune and Mercury, you mentioned the fire blanket before. And when I first glimpsed this particular transit, all I kept thinking was smog. And possibly it's opposite. Tesla has been in the news so much, and with the electric cars and, all of these things, they've been in the news for their monetary gains and or losses. You can't help but think of, when you're thinking of using electricity more, maintaining electricity more, you also have to consider how all of these generators are actually powered and how all of that electricity is conducted. And while we try to move into more of those natural, sustainable efforts, so much of that is run by these gas-powered generators. So even if we're moving into solar and wind power and water power, we still have, those are still natural resources, more renewable in some senses than oil-based, but so many of those products and things are used from those gas-powered generators too. It's just so interesting how, you have to look at one, when you're looking at one, you have to look at its antithesis, its opposite. And so you kind of have to look at, when we looked at the Libra full moon, we have to look at the Aries sun and see how those things relate to each other and how they correspond. And I got myself so off track from the Mercury Neptune.
That's Mercury Neptune for you.
Back to Mercury Neptune. With Mercury and Neptune in conjunction, could that give us like a brave face also? Can we find a way that we're, I'm not great at putting myself out there in this respect. I find a lot of comfort in the fact that it's just me and you talking. And that gives me that little safety net. Are we going to be able to find ourselves putting that self out there, more of yourself out there in a more courageous way, even if it feels icky and sticky and vulnerable and uncomfortable, but are you able to do it in order to fuel those dreams that you have too?
Yeah.
Are you able to have that brave face, put on the mask and step into the light of Aries and know you have the comfort of whatever fog you've created around yourself in
Yeah.
order to push through it, you know?
Yeah, certainly. If that's what like the sun and the full moon is showing up for you to be coming up to be healed, then this is giving you that impetus to do it. And like you say, you can do it in whatever way. Take whatever steps, break it down, do it slowly, bit by bit. You know, it doesn't have to go from 0 to 100 overnight. Do it in incremental steps in a comfortable, slow way. You know, whatever it is that you've been pushing yourself to do, because there is something that you're taking that leap on. You know, in Aries, it's something that it wants you to initiate, isn't it, and start. So whatever it is that's been in your head that you're wanting to get moving on, that you don't want to be held back on anymore, whatever that
Yeah.
itch is you've been waiting to scratch, it's that kind of
Yeah.
thing, isn't it? That thing that you kind of know you need to do, but you haven't been able to. This is like the universe, the cosmos coming together to say, right, now's your time. And it's like you've got the support to do it.
Yeah. It's like the scratching the itch of the impulsive post, on Blue Sky or,
Yes.
X or whatever, it's somehow finding yourself not being able to not give the speech or, having like controversial conversations, but it's definitely like leaning into the courage, but still somehow managing to keep a handle on the temper maybe or the impulsivity in a
Yeah.
sense. I think
Yeah.
it might get a little muddy there.
Yeah, I suppose it helps
Maybe
having Mars in a water sign there, just having that,
yeah,
taking that edge off.
slow it down, temper that just a little bit. Yeah. So you're not quite getting so um, too impulsive,
Yeah.
creating injury.
Yeah. You got the
Mhm.
steam or the smog rather than pure fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got a fiery moon there for that as well. So that helps with getting things going. That Sagittarius moon that wants to learn and grow and
Mhm.
expand, that's making the trine. So that is really saying, yeah, it's go time. It really is.
Uh, And along with that, you've got a whole sign trine there from the moon to the sun, but you've got Mars on knocking on the door
Yes.
of Leo. So
Yeah.
you've just about got that fire trine
Yeah.
between those three. Yeah, it's so close.
Yeah, we'll be talking about Mars and Leo next week, so
Hmm.
it's so close. In fact, in horary, if it's that close to the cusp, we'd say it's like in the front garden of the sign. It's kind of so close that
It's
it's
on the
painful.
property.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so we'd
yeah.
count it as being in there, which is interesting how you use different techniques for different signs. But yeah, you could count that as that grand trine because it is so close. But just with like Mars is still in the shower. He's in the house, but he's in the shower. He's kind of not in the
Mhm.
room.
It's that buildup, it's peaking that pressure and almost to that pivot point.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, fire signs, it's your time, but also kind of everybody, isn't it really? The way that this chart is fixed out. It's like the cardinal signs, Uranus
You
being
mentioned,
Mm.
huh?
Yeah, because Uranus is in that sextile to Venus. Venus is sort of activated. She's still at her stationary degree. So she's sextiling Uranus. So there's something happening there. We've got the mutable signs all activated by Pisces. So yeah, it's kind of all happening for everybody, really. It's hard to sort of pick out.
Planetary soup.
It is. So yeah, good luck.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's still calmer than it was in March.
very true. A little sweeter.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of hold on to that, don't we, through April?
Hmm.
The fact that we know we're kind of easing into the second half of the year, and the second half of the year is calmer and better than the first half of the year was. So that concludes our week, and we'll both be back next week looking at the 16th to the 23rd of April. So thank you, Shawna, for joining me. You can reach Shawna at smartastro@gmail.com, and you can also find her on Blue Sky and Substack at Smart Astro. And I'm Sonia from Celestia Astrology. So we look forward to you joining us. Please do remember to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and please do comment with emojis as well if you've liked this and you don't have time to write out comment sharing your experiences, moon or a sun if you've enjoyed the full moon, or any other
Just put the
emoji.
little foggy face. That's okay too.
Yes. Yeah, a little foggy face if you're struggling like we are. That would be great. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye bye.